So the year was 598 BC. The Babylonians are expanding their empire and have now invaded Judah. A series of events, which we won't get into. Jehoiakim basically surrenders to preserve the city. And in 598 BC, quite a few people from Judah, Jews from Judah, are taken to Babylon as captives. And so I want to talk about some of these captives and something that happens to them in Babylon on today's edition of Theology Thursday. So the city of Jerusalem will not be destroyed until 586 BC. And there are actually multiple waves of deportations. The largest one will be in 586. But the first one, as I noted, was in 598 BC. And the Babylonians took back to Babylon what would be considered the cream of the crop. Usually young adults, and they would take them with them. They did take some adults, but they would take young adults, young men in particular, and would train them up to be Babylonians, basically. So they wanted good-looking, smart, athletic, like these hand-picked these guys. And four of the guys who were picked that we know of to go through this training process in Babylon were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And the names will be changed to Belshazzar, Daniel's name, and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So when they get to Babylon, they're put into the king's court. And of course, if you're going to be trained up to be Babylonian officials because you're smart and eloquent, all the things that you would want in someone representing your country, they're going to eat from the king's table, so to speak. And so that sets the context. And in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, it says, "But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned you food and your drink. For why should he see that you are in worse condition? So if you don't eat this food, you're not going to be as well off as the other ones. I'm going to get in trouble." Basically, what he's saying, he said, "Why would you endanger my head with the king?" And so verse 11 says, Daniel said, over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Attest your servants for 10 days, so let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. And then check us out, see who looks better." And so at the end of the 10 days, they look great, and so the eunuch continued to allow them to follow this. Now, sometimes this has been called the Daniel diet. Nothing but vegetables and water. A lot of people who are looking for biblical justification for being vegetarian or vegan will use this passage, which is fine. There's nothing, if you want to be a vegetarian, go ahead. If you want to take it a step further and be vegan, go ahead. That's your business. But the Bible does not endorse that. Doesn't condemn it. In fact, the Bible really doesn't speak to it. Most of the dietary concerns in the Bible fall into two categories. The first category is clean and unclean. And we find these back like in the book of Leviticus. The second category, which is what we find here and what is found in 1 Corinthians, actually, is idol worship. Now, here's the reason. And this is not easy for us to comprehend. Because if I want to get some meat, I go to my refrigerator and I pull it out. In fact, I can purchase meat at the grocery store, bring it home, and wrap it well, put it in the freezer, and it can be there for months. I can take it out and cook it, and it's just fine. That is very, very recent that we have the capacity to do that within the last 100 years. The ability to maintain food for meat, particularly for a long period of time. In the ancient world, when you killed it, you had to eat it, and what you didn't eat, you might smoke or hold on, and it'd still be okay, maybe for a day or two at the most, depending on the time of year, and then it would get rancid and bad. So most of the game that they ate in the Old Testament, most of the meat, were doves, like doves and pigeons, and rabbits and small animals. Then on special occasions for the whole family, if you brought everybody together, you might cook a goat or a sheep, and that's what you would eat. On very rare occasions, you would kill a calf and eat it, and that was for a large kind of citywide banquet. Okay? Now, there's an exception to that, and that's inside the towns. By New Testament times, in the cities. And so what they would do is these animals would be brought in from the countryside oftentimes in the mornings. And they would be brought to the temples. And in many of these cities, there were multiple temples because they believed in multiple gods. And the priest would make a sacrifice of one or several animals on these altars to these pagan deities. But then what do you do with the meat after you've made the sacrifice? They would burn part of it because they thought burning it, that meant God was eating it. But what do you do with the rest of it? It's going to go bad. You sell it in the marketplace. So all the meat in the king's house, all of the meat in is Nebuchadnezzar, all the meat in Nebuchadnezzar's house, all of it comes from an idol's altar. This is why Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians about meat offered to idols. So Daniel's not saying, I'm defiling myself by eating meat. We have some real issues then because we know that Jesus ate meat because he ate fish. What Daniel is saying is, I am not going to eat something that was offered to an idol. I mean, we could have flipped it around. Maybe they offered vegetables to the idol, and he says, I don't want those vegetables. They'll defile me because they come off a pagan altar. I'll eat meat instead, but that's not the way it was. So Daniel, and the reason he says he'll only eat vegetables is because there was no meat available in the king's house that did not come from a pagan temple and a sacrifice typically that morning. So Daniel's saying, I want to keep myself pure from paganism. He wants to show this distinction in his own life of commitment. So let me just say a couple things then about this in the modern context. Number one, obviously there's some places that are just idolatrous that Christians shouldn't be. They worship the flesh, they worship money or whatever it is, and God's just nowhere to be found, so to speak. So there are some places, but really it's far more distinctive than that. The reality is that sometimes you and I do something much like Daniel out of a personal commitment. I'm not comfortable doing that. It has some connections I'm not comfortable with. And so we go, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to avoid that. If somebody asks why, we very kindly share why. Now, this leads to the second thing and most important. Okay? I believe firmly we should avoid meat offered to idols, whatever that happens to be in our world, whatever situations or things or goals or whatever it is, we want to avoid that. However, there's no indication anywhere that Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah told all the rest of the Jewish boys they couldn't eat the meat. And this is the great danger of this idea we find in Scripture, that it can very quickly and easily be turned into legalism. Well, I don't watch those kind of movies, and if you do, you're not as holy as I am. Or if you were holy, or if you really love the Lord, you wouldn't watch that. Or I can't believe that a Christian would watch that kind of thing. We have to be very, very good. This is where legalism typically comes from in modern Christianity. There's something we have a personal conviction about. And I believe that if you feel like God's laid on your heart, then you need to follow that. But applying it to everybody else and then beginning to judge them is excessively dangerous. It's really dangerous. Let me just give you one example, okay, in our lives. I believe that music can be divided into different categories. And I don't mean like rock and roll, metal, and that sort of thing. I mean, like, I believe that there is some music that is just very anti-Christian. It violates everything Scripture teaches. The message is opposed to what the Bible clearly teaches. I believe that there is some music that is completely amoral. There's no morality in it at all. And we teach our kids lots of these in our kids. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. There's no morality or immorality to the ABC's song. We have lots of these little goofy, silly songs. When our kids were young, there were no iPads or anything. So we would sing when we would travel to pass the time. And all kinds of just goofy, silly songs that have no moral or immoral connotations either. Then there are some songs that are not Christian. They're not sung or written by Christians. But the message of the song does agree with things that the Bible teaches. The most obvious place you would see this is there are a lot of secular artists who've written love songs. And love between a husband and wife is very biblical. Now, they may not describe it as Christian love. They might not talk about Jesus. They might not have a personal commitment to Jesus. But the message of the song doesn't violate the Bible. As a matter of fact, in some ways, it kind of aligns itself with Scripture. You know, songs about honesty, songs about commitment and faithfulness and things like that. Kind of, they line up with things the Bible teaches, though they don't come from a Christian source. Then we have music that's called Christian, but sometimes I have some questions. They're maybe marginally Christian. And then there are songs that are clearly Christian. They're written by Christian artists. And so years ago, we just made a commitment we're not doing the first category. We're not listening to music that opposes what Christianity teaches. But we listen to Christian music. We rarely ever listen to secular music. It's just a commitment that my wife and I have made. We just feel like it helps us spiritually. However, I don't condemn it. Look, if you want to listen to secular music, it's your business. It's fine. As long as it's not music that's impacting your mind and thought patterns, because you listen to a lot of it that is clearly anti-scriptural. But just because this is a personal commitment. So in other words, I would say it's meat offered to idols. I just don't want to get close to it. Nothing wrong with the meat itself. Like I said, plenty of secular songs, nothing wrong with them. They don't violate Scripture. But we've just chosen to listen to clearly Christian music. And so that's just a personal one in my life. So it's fine to have them. I think we should have them. Daniel has them. I think it helps us fortify our commitment and faithfulness to the Lord. But we have to be very, very careful not to become legalistic. Daniel didn't. And God blessed him because Daniel was faithful. But I just want to clarify this because sometimes there have been books written called the Daniel Diet. They tell you about how much healthier it is. This had absolutely nothing to do with physical health. But in fact, there was nothing pretty much they could eat that was unhealthy unless it was poisonous. Everything was fresh right out of the farm. Everything was 100% natural. There were no chemicals of any kind put on anything, anywhere. So everything was 100% natural, organic. So you really couldn't eat bad food like we think of it, processed foods. But it has nothing to do with health, this diet. It has to do with a spiritual commitment. So I just want to kind of clarify that because I know a lot of people over the years have asked me questions about it. So, man, God bless you. And in your life, when you see things that are meat offered to idols, stop and ask, do I need to avoid that? God bless you. Have a great day.